remember how that book begins, the first sentence of the first chapter. It's a 4-word statement. And that statement is, it's not about you. As I began to listen to what God had to say to us this morning through the story of Jesus' transfiguration and through Psalm 99, the thought that echoed in my mind were those 4 words. It's not about you. It's not about me as pastor. It's not about any of you out there. It's not even about us as a congregation. It's not about us. It's about God. So often we search through the Bible for ways in which the Bible stories are about us. We look for the ways that it's about our hopes and our dreams, our fears and our failures, our doubts, our faith. I spend time during the week thinking about how a Bible passage applies to our lives, or how it might speak into something that those of you in the congregation might be dealing with. Most preachers structure their sermons so that they end by explaining a way that the Bible passage might be applied to our lives in the coming week, the way we can put that scripture into action. And today I'm going to start with that application. The mission statement for our congregation is that we aim together to worship God and to teach, encourage, and practice discipleship. So today we're going to focus on the first part of that mission. We're going to focus on God and who God is, and then respond with worship. To do that, we're going to take a closer look at Psalm 99, which is why I printed it on the back of your bulletin. Not in the same translation that I just read, but in another translation that we'll be using as we study that. Hebrew poets were very intentional about how they structured a psalm. It was one of the beauties of their poetry. And this one's formed a little bit like songs are formed today, where there's a verse and then a chorus or a refrain. And in this psalm, there's a refrain that's repeated twice with a minor variation. In verse 5, it says, "Magnify the Lord our God, bow low at his footstool, he is holy." And then again in verse 9, it says, "Magnify the Lord our God, bow low at his holy mountain, because the Lord our God is holy." But this psalm is actually not built in 2 parts. It's built in 3 parts. And each of those 3 parts ends with a statement that God is holy. If you look at the end of verse 3, it says, he is holy. And again at the end of verse 5, he is holy. And at the end of verse 9, the Lord our God is holy. And that's going to be our refrain this morning as we study this psalm. Our God is holy. And so I'm going to invite you at various times to say it with me. Like right now.
Our God is holy.
What does holy mean? The Webster Dictionary has several meanings for it. The first was that something is holy if it's set apart for religious purposes or dedicated to God, like holy ground or the Holy Bible. Another definition was that holy is used as an expression of surprise or astonishment, like holy smokes or holy mackerel. And lastly, holy is a word that's used for that which is divine, God, godly. What did holy mean to the Hebrew people who prayed this psalm, who used it in their worship? For them, the word was kadosh. And that's a word that means holy, sacred, set apart, different totally separate. Our God is different. Our God is set apart. Our God is holy. So say it with me again.
Our God is holy.
How is God holy? If we look at the first stanza of this psalm, he starts out by saying, the Lord rules. The Lord sits on a throne of winged heavenly creatures. The Lord is great and is above all the nations of the world. This is the God who created the whole world, the one who made the vastness of our universe 93 billion light years across. Just our galaxy is 100,000 light years across. And that means if you travel at the speed of light, which is 183,000 miles per second, it would take you 100,000 years to get across just our galaxy. Our sun is 1,000,000 times larger than this Earth we live on. It would take the space shuttle 7 months to get from here to the sun, if it could get that close. And yet our God who created all of that vastness also created the microscopic. In just one human body, there are 724 trillion cells. Trillion. Of those, 35 billion are just the skin that encase us. There's at least 200 different kinds of cells, and each of those needs water and minerals and electrolytes to keep it healthy, to help it replace itself. And a cell itself is big compared to the little spindles of DNA that are inside and the other particles that make up a cell. God made it all. God made rocks and dirt and trees and tomatoes and birds and fish and cows and people. An amazing and wonderful array of people in all colors and shapes and sizes, each one unique, each one special. God created everything to work together for life. And so let's say it again. Our
God is holy.
When we think about all that God has made, when we consider that power and that might, the one who built us up, who can just as easily tear us down, who's in charge of it all, then we too, like the earth and the nations in verse 1 of this psalm, would quake and shake. We too might fall on our faces like Peter and James and John at the sound of the one who spoke the world into being. And we too, like the psalmist in verse 3 says, we should be grateful and say thank you to the great and awesome God by name. And so let's say it again. Our God is holy. And so we can agree with the writer of this psalm as he begins verse 4 with those words, strong king. And then he goes on to focus on another aspect of who God is in the second stanza of the psalm. Our God, the strong one in charge, loves justice. What is justice? I found a whole slew of synonyms for justice. Fairness, fair play, equity, impartiality, morality, integrity, lawfulness, rightness, righteousness. Justice has to do with ensuring that everyone is treated fairly, that each one gets what they need to succeed, that things are divided correctly. When I was growing up, the rule in our house was that if there was a piece of cake or a piece of pie that needed to be shared, one person cut it, and the other person got to choose which piece they wanted. And I can tell you there was a lot of time spent on making sure that those two halves were absolutely perfectly divided. If you ever doubted that we were made in the image of God, you just need to listen to children and their keen sense of fairness and justice. It's not fair, you'll hear out of so many children. It's not fair that Jim got to steer the car when he was 10 and I have to wait till I'm 12. Or it's not fair that Susie gets to have 4 friends at her sleepover and I only get 2. And of course, over the course of life, we get a bit jaded so that most adults will respond to that by saying, life is not fair. How many of you said that? The gods that were worshipped in so many religions are gods that were uncaring and hard-hearted with little thought of humankind. People are at the mercy of fate and the luck of the draw. It's totally a random chance if you get good things in life or if you get terrible things in life. And yet in verse 4, the psalmist says that our God is different. Our God is the God who established what was fair. Our God works for justice and righteousness for his people. While we might see an immediate problem in a situation that seems unfair, God sees that bigger picture. God sees and establishes what is just in the long run. We all know that what is equal is not always what is just. A child with special needs is going to need more assistance and more attention to get to the same place as the average child. Is that unfair? No, it's right. It's just. Each uniquely created person is precious to God, made with love and care, and God longs for each of us to have what we need to grow and to thrive. In an amazing display of trust, God entrusted to us the responsibility for working out some of this justice in our lives together. Let's say it together with our
God is holy.
We affirm that our God is set apart and different and holy in this way. As humans, we are so often tempted to act out of selfishness rather than out of a sense of justice. Satan, the enemy, twists our sense of justice sometimes so that we want to keep for ourselves freedoms that we would want to deny to others. People follow double standards. We all want to think that rules apply to everyone else, but maybe not so much to ourselves. We see the damage that evil has done in the world and in our own lives, and it seems unfair. And yet, God is the one who loves justice. In our Bible study, as we're studying Revelation, we have been celebrating the fact that God will destroy the destroyers, that God will make sure that greed does not have the last word, that good will triumph over evil, and that violence will not pay off in the end. Jesus is coming, and his name is faithful and true. And so let's say it again.
Our God is holy.
Our God is absolutely strong and absolutely fair and just. And all of that begins to sound a little bit distant and maybe even a little bit scary. Like a stern judge. And so as we begin the third stanza of Psalm 99, the poet lifts up 3 names the names of leaders of God's people, the names of Moses and Aaron and Samuel. And one of the things that these three have in common that may have been on the psalmist's mind was that at one time in their lives, as it's recorded for us in the Bible, each of these three leaders prayed for God's people, first confessing the sin of the people, the way in which the people had neglected God, the ways in which they had perverted God's justice. They prayed for the people in confessing their sin about how they had cheated on God and went after other things to worship other idols. And they cried out to God to forgive the people. And God didn't just send a message back. He didn't just write a decree or pass some judgment. It says that God himself answered them. God spoke to them from a cloud. God spoke to Moses on the cloud, through the cloud on Mount Sinai. God led the people of Israel through the desert with his presence in a cloud. There was the cloud that came down on Peter and James and John and Jesus there on that mountain where he had been transfigured. The cloud of God's immediate presence. In Hosea 11:9, the prophet speaks for God, saying, I am God, the Holy One, and I am here in your midst. It's this God in our midst that answers our prayers. This God in our midst sees us and knows us. This God in our midst wants to be in relationship with us. So this God who gives us rules and guidelines also forgives us when we go astray. The God who forgives us will make things right by avenging the wrong deeds, not with punishment, but with a restorative kind of judgment and justice. This God is the Word made flesh that came to live amongst us in our very midst, and we respond with the words, our God is holy. What does it mean to worship a God that is holy? Since our worship only begins here at church and continues as we go out, our worship continues throughout the day and throughout the week. What does it mean to belong to a God that is holy? I think the psalmist who wrote Psalm 99 didn't just write it to help us understand who God is, but also to help us understand what it means for us to belong to a God who is holy. In that repeated directive that the psalmist would have heard, that the priests of Israel would have said to the people again and again. And if you move the slide one more, Dar. They would say to the people, I am the Lord your God, be holy, because I am holy. It sounds a lot like what Jesus said to the disciples in our reading last week from the Sermon on the Mount, which ended, be perfect, therefore, as your heavenly Father is perfect. And so if Psalm 99 tells us about how God is holy, about how God is different, it guides us in being holy ourselves. And it isn't an attempt to try to be more religious. It's to be more like God, to be different the way God is different. Another way to say that is that way, to be different because the Lord your God is different. And so we have to be different in courage and the strength that it takes to be faithful to the God who created us. Be holy as the Lord your God is holy.